Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Sadlier School Live. I have back with me again the wonderful and amazing Dr. Matthew Beyranevand. Hello, Matthew.
Hi, Cam. How are you doing today?
I am so good. Thank you for being back with us again today to talk with us about the benefits of teaching kids and also you yourself understanding the history of math. So I'm excited to hear more about this topic
Well,
from you.
I'm so glad you're excited because generally speaking, if you hear the phrase the history of math, you immediately would think snooze fest. And that is a common misconception. And today, what I want to do with you and the viewers is to really go through what some of the benefits are about learning the history of math, because I teach that particular course at the college level. And I really work with a lot of teachers and parents to see about finding ways to implement the history of math into the learning process. And so in 10 minutes, we're going to do that over the next 10 minutes, do that together to see what some of those benefits are, because I believe it's a very underutilized resource for students, teachers, and parents as we learn mathematics.
Well,
So,
I
you ready to get started?
Sorry, I think it's amazing that you're going to take all of this information that you teach over the course of a semester, and we're going to get the Cliff Notes version right here.
That's exactly right. Cliff Notes version it is, as we talk about the history of math. And one of my good friends and author of a few different books has this amazing quote about the history of math, in that it is absent from math education. And when we see it come up, it's generally just this own independent project about, yeah, you know what, research a famous mathematician, and then we just move on with our lives. But really, it can be woven into daily or weekly lessons. And this is something that parents can be incorporating during this time of virtual learning or learning at home as a way to promote many different things. And today, what I'm going to do with you is share with you my top 8 reasons in honor of David Letterman's top 10 every night. Here's my top 8 reasons or ways to incorporate the history of math in the way we learn mathematics. The first thing, if you've been following any of my master classes, webinars, or previous talks that I've been doing on this Facebook Live with Sadlier, you know that I am obsessed with conceptual understanding as being a very important component. And if we look throughout the history of math at the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Indians, and the Chinese, all the math that they did was focused on understanding. They didn't do things that we do nowadays, like please excuse my Sally, dear Sally, or things like foiling, things that drive math teachers crazy, because it's all just memorization of procedures. Here, if you were on the Facebook Live yesterday, on the left, you see the Egyptian method for doubling, and that is the way they did multiplication. And on the right, we see another example of the Chinese method of solving 3 linear simultaneous equations, all based on conceptual understanding. And number 7 is perseverance. One of the main attributes of why we teach math is to work on perseverance. And when we talk about failing, I like to say the first attempt in learning. And there's so many great examples of the history of math of people showing perseverance to solve the problem. And there's nothing better than the great Oxford mathematician Andrew Wiles, who spent 7 years trying to come up with a proof for Fermat's last theorem, something that he originally thought he had the answer for in only 3 years, only to find out that he made a small mistake. But he went through and persevered. 7 years later, came up with the amazing proof for this. So often kids want to raise their hand, or our own children want help right away. We can look to the history of math with some great examples of perseverance. Number 6, the idea of stories. There are some incredible stories that delve into the history of math. Some of them have some interesting mistakes involved with it. And I'm going to share with you a quick story here today. And it has to do with my favorite mathematician, Pythagoras. Now, the story goes like this. He had his group of followers who studied mathematics, but they only believed in studying whole numbers, real numbers, rational numbers, not focusing on something called irrational numbers. Well, the story goes like this. One of his followers at one point came to him and said, "Look, Pythagoras, Pythagoras, I have this proof for irrational numbers." And Pythagoras says, "No, my friend, we will never speak of that, Hippasus." "But no, Pythagoras, it's true, it's true. Look, we have it." And then he went out and shared this, even though Pythagoras told him not to. And what did Pythagoras do? He rewarded one of his followers by taking him on a boat and throwing him overboard, only to claim credit for the proof years later when he realized, that's correct. And there's also stories about people running naked through the streets yelling, "Eureka, Eureka." Now, the stories about throwing people overboard and running naked through the streets may not be the most appropriate, but there are great stories of famous mathematicians doing some amazing things and also making some mistakes that we could incorporate into our learning. Number 5, the development of the concept. So often, teachers and students only learn the final formula or the final approach or the final proof. But looking at how things were developed over time can really build up some understanding and engagement. And one of the things I really love to draw upon is coming up with a precise value of pi. Well, the Babylonians were able to estimate it at about 3. The Egyptians used rope and able to come up with a value of about 3 1/8. But Archimedes and the work that he did, inscribing and circumscribing different regular polygons among a circle, was able to come up with a very precise upper and lower limit of pi. And eventually, with the use of computers, we were able to determine that pi is irrational and it goes on forever. And we know now about 1 billion or so digits, but we didn't originally. So exploring the development of a concept. Number 4 is what we talked about yesterday about solving problems multiple ways. And we can see that many mathematicians throughout the years from both the East and the West had many different methods. For those of you that might be familiar with high school mathematics, you might have heard this term called completing the square. And I would argue that 95% of people have no idea what we mean about completing the square. Can we memorize that formula? Absolutely. But what does it actually mean? It was the Babylonians who first completed the square when we talked about solving quadratics and what it actually means, and we can see it and understand it. Number 3 is girls in math. I will tell you that girls are just as good, if not better, at doing math as the boys, but you would not see that based on the percentage of girls taking AP courses in mathematics and studying math in college. But there are some amazing female mathematicians that we could draw upon. Let's kind of forget about some of those old white guys that we hear, the Pythagoras, the Euclid, the Eulers. Let's look at some amazing female mathematicians and the things that they did under the most dire of circumstances and what they were able to do. There are some great ones both in the past and the present that could be our role models for these girls to encourage them to study math and study the benefits. If you don't know Hypatia, take a look at the things that she did living in the most difficult times. She is someone who should be a role model for everybody, but in particular girls. Number 2, the interdisciplinary learning. How often do we hear that term? All the time. And we try to make those connections between math and science. But you know what? We can do that with math and social studies and history using the history of math. And we can also talk about math and music, as there's a very strong correlation between those two. And there is a lot of history that comes from that as well. And number 1 is the thing that we can do is something that's called the vinculum. Now, what's the vinculum? The vinculum is the line that we would see above a value that today means it's repeating itself, 1.3 with a line over it. Well, that actually used to be the way we did order of operations. Right now, we do order of operations, as you can see on the top here, with all these brackets and parentheses. And I will tell you, that is not a mathematical creation. That was created by the inventor of the typewriter, who said, I can no longer use this vinculum. Look on the bottom here. It's a much easier process for determining order of operations. Oop, the first line at the bottom is 2 plus 3. Well, that equals 5. What next? Oop, I go to the left. 1 plus 5. Oh, now I go to the right. 6 plus 4 is 10. It's a lot more visually pleasing. But because of the typewriter and this creation of brackets and parentheses, we have stopped in the late 1800s using the vinculum, even though it had been used for thousands of years. And now we use this broken manner of parentheses and brackets. So if nothing else, we want to bring back the vinculum. So as you can see here, there is so many great things related to the history of math that teachers, parents, and students can dive into, especially in this time that we have now of online, distance, virtual learning. It's a good opportunity to explore more about the history of math and its benefits.
Thank you so much, Matthew. And I wanted to bring up a couple of things. Number one, I want to thank Gina for joining us today. Gina was actually on last week's masterclass, so it's been awesome to have you back, Gina. So thanks for saying hi to us. And number two, I wanted to let everybody know that I dropped some links into the chat to some articles that you sent me earlier today that you thought people might be interested in. So those are in the comments on today's video. And I've also linked to your past masterclass and webinars where you've done some other, I think a few of them you've kind of briefly touched on this history of math on them as well.
Yep, that's exactly right. So I did a master class that we talked a little bit about the history of math. And one of the articles is something that I wrote about the benefits, similar to the things that I'm talking about here, but links and things that you can use if you are interested in learning more. And then another is a blog post by my great friend, the British mathematician Junaid, who wrote about how teaching math without the history in this is really soulless. And he makes a very good argument about why and how we should be incorporating it. So if you want to learn more about that, those resources that you shared, Cam, I think would be a great resource for our viewers to get a little bit more of a flavor about the history of math.
Well, I'm impressed. You did well with your Cliff Notes version of it, and you kept it really, really short for all of us. So thank you.
Exactly. We try to do what we can in 10, 12 minutes on these Facebook Lives every day. Get the most bang for your buck.
Yes, exactly. So thank you so much for being with us again here today. As a reminder, we'll be back tomorrow. Well, Matthew won't be back with me tomorrow, but I will be back on tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, 12 o'clock Pacific, and we hope to see you there.
Thanks
Bye.
so much, Cam. Great talking to you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Matthew.